From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. Voting in Panama's general election has closed. The polls had been open since 7 a.m. local time, with 80% of the electorate of nearly 3 million people expected to vote. 7 parties are authorized to participate by the Electoral Court in addition to independent candidates. The presidency, vice presidency, local councils, and 71 congressional representatives are up for election. The vote has been marked by corruption, inequality, and political apathy. 4 candidates have been leading the race to replace the current president, Juan Carlos Varela, and each of them represents the political right or center-right. We begin with Laurentino Cortizo, candidate of the Democratic Revolutionary Party, who was leading in the polls. The 66-year-old is a businessman and former vice presidential candidate alongside Martin Torrijos. He had almost 50% of voter intention in the latest opinion polls. His main proposals include talk about improving public services, better access to health care, and drinking water. His main opponent, according to those polls, is Romulo Ru. He's the leader of the right-wing Democratic Change Party and was Panama's foreign minister in 2012 and 2013 under the now and present former president Ricardo Martinelli. The latest poll showed him with 26% of the votes. He has proposed to reduce the country's bureaucracy and make Social Security funds more transparent. The polls had put in third position Ricardo Lombana, who is standing as an independent candidate. Lombana was not very well known, but his support had risen significantly in recent weeks. Some polls gave him nearly 11% of the vote. The 45-year-old has promised to create a special prosecutor to fight corruption and a new constitution to reinforce the separation of powers. Next is Jose Isabel Blandon, the candidate of the Panamanista Party, which is the party of the current president, Juan Carlos Varela. He is lagging far behind in the polls with around 6%. The 51-year-old has proposed to create a national network of entrepreneurs and more investment in technology for agriculture. And finally, Saul Mendes is the candidate of the left-wing Broad Front for Democracy. He's been an activist and leader in the Combatant Constructive Workers Union in Colón, but he captured just 1% of opinion polls. He is the only candidate proposing a radical alternative to the system, including a constituent assembly. And speaking at a news conference, Saul Mendes, candidate for the leftist Broad Front for Democracy Party, detailed some of his objectives should he win the election.
Those corrupt people, called politicians and businessmen, who have stolen from us, will be judged and will go to jail where they belong. What has been stolen will be recovered. We demand a new democratic state where real power belongs to the people, who can choose and revoke mandates. We will eliminate impunity before the law so that no one can hide behind it.
Citizens exercise their right to vote with hope for change.
I hope the right to vote is exercised as it should be, the people's will, and that everyone turns out to vote to exercise our right to choose the new president.
I think that everyone is looking for change, but you have to look for which change will be best. We have to be realistic. Who is most capable of realizing change?
It's time for change. Someone has to bring order to the country. What issues are most urgent here in Panama? Corruption and client politics.
Independent presidential candidate Marco Amega Leo invited citizens to vote in a responsible way in order to guarantee their well-being for the next 5 years.
Today is a big day to start again and to do things well. It is an important day to think and to reflect, because what we do today, unlike any other day, has a long-lasting significance beyond just 24 hours. It will last more than 5 years. Can you imagine a nail voting to rust for 5 years? That nail won't be me, but mistakes can be made. People know that.
And independent candidate Ana Matilde Gomez went to vote and said that despite not gaining much exposure in the debates, she stands to challenge the current system.
Even while the structure of the debates didn't allow me to develop much of what I have to offer, nor my track record in public life, I am here to challenge the system, because we evidently have a system that has failed, that has left a lot of people behind. It is a very unfair system. We need to demonstrate that it needs to be refounded in an organized way, with experience, so that no one is left behind by the economy. And while the economy is being reactivated, we can order our political house, which is based on a model that has already collapsed.
Our correspondent in Panama City, Hugo Vera, sent us this report just as the polls were coming to a close.
We're at a voting centre on the outskirts of Panama City, where the final voters are arriving. The stations are closing now at 4 p.m. local time across the country. However, those who are queuing and have their identity card will still be able to vote. Once they've shut the smallest centres, those with the fewest voters, in indigenous areas and in some other zones in the country's interior, will start to release their results. Those official results are expected to arrive around 4:30 p.m. local time, and at around 7 at night, any lead in the polls should be visible at the biggest centres in the country. Above all, in the middle of Panama City, which will define the next president of Panama. It's important to remember that here, there is no second vote, so whoever receives the most votes today in the presidential election will serve as the next president. The last president, Juan Carlos Varela, was elected by almost 40% of the vote, meaning that he didn't represent the absolute majority, as in other countries in the region. So we're expecting to see decisive results at around 7 o'clock, and according to the Electoral Commission, the turnout is expected to be at around 80%. If that does occur, we'll be looking at a record number of votes.
Now, to discuss this election, we're joined by political scientist Richard Morales, who is in Panama. Richard was the presidential pre-candidate for the Frente Amplio. Hi, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Camila. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So what have you heard in terms of initial results coming in, and what was your reading on the poll indications ahead of today's election?
Well, the initial results that are approximately between 5% of the tables has Nito Cortizo of El PRD at a lead of at around 35%. These numbers are changing very rapidly as information is being reported. And second place is being hard fought between Rómulo Rux of Cambio Democrático Party, Martinelli's party, and the independent candidate Ricardo Lombana. So the order of the candidates appears to have been that was reported in the polls, but the numbers so far are very different. It's worth noting that the three main polls in Panama, which were published by three of the major newspapers and media corporations, had very different percentages. But the order seems to adjust to what they had predicted.
And Richard, describe some of these different candidates you're talking about and the parties which they come from, and what have been the issues that are dominating the presidential campaign?
Well, all the candidates, with the exception of Saúl Mendes of the Broad Front Party, are right-wing candidates. Nito Cortizo, the front runner right now, is from El PRD. El PRD was the party of the military regime that governed between 1968 and 1989, that was ousted by a U.S. invasion in 1989. The SEDE party, or Democratic Change Party, and his candidate Rómulo Rux is the party of Ricardo Martinelli, the supermarket business politician who governed Panama between 2009 and 2014, whom is currently being tried in jail for an eavesdropping scandal and for corruption. And the other parties, the party that is currently governing, the Partido Panamanista, his candidate José Blandón is very far away in the numbers. He has approximately 10-12% of what has been reported so far. And Ricardo Lombana is an independent candidate who has presented himself as an anti-corruption champion. He is a far-right candidate. He has some libertarian positions even, based on having a very small state, little government intervention in the economy. The election has revolved around corruption. The Odebrecht scandal has reached all three of the main parties, and that has weakened their credibility with the electorate, and also a scandal within the National Assembly. the current president does not have a sufficient majority in the assembly, so it has tried to buy the votes of candidate through the naming of their of people that work for them in the government, and they have used that to try and blackmail the legislature, which has fallen into this because effectively there is this huge corruption scandal involving the legislature. So the election has centered on corruption, but the consequence of this is that Panama's deeper problems, deeper conflicts, inequality, exclusion, marginalization have not been discussed in the campaign.
Absolutely. That was going to be my next question, Richard. Were any issues missing from the campaign discourse, and what are the issues, tell us a bit more about that, which are important to Panama's working class, social movements, and unions?
So we have currently a high growing economy. Panama's economy has been growing for many years now, but it is an economy that grows at the expense of its workers and of the environment. It is a highly unequal economy where it concentrates wealth and accumulation in the transit zone, which is basically the canal zone. And it is basically an economy that extracts rent from transit activity, be it through the canal, be it through the ports, or the financial and legal international global services. So it is an economy that, even though it extracts massive amounts of wealth from capital movements, it concentrates these wealth on very few people. And most of Panamanians workers are in a very precarious situation, very insecure working conditions, and there is growing unemployment as well. So the growing concerns of the great majority of the people have not been included within the electoral agenda. This the anti-corruption debate has been the one that has dominated. Now, how have the elites been able to compensate for this disconnect between political discourse and people's realities? They have done this through very deeply entrenched clientelistic networks that manage to try and buy off votes in the poor communities of Panama, and this has been what has allowed them to remain in power and what has allowed them to have a lead in this election so far. And the main threat to this, some of the other issues in this campaign has been a water crisis, has been a crisis of the educational system, of health. There's a massive social security crisis in the moment. The system is about to go bankrupt, and there's growing concerns among workers that the system will be privatized. So there the campaign didn't really focus on the main issue in Panama: economic inequality and access to quality public services. The only campaign and candidate who did was the broad front candidate, Saul Mendes, the only left-leaning candidate. The remaining candidates basically competed on who could better administer the inequality in Panama, the system in Panama, or who was less tainted by the corruption scandals.
As you've mentioned, corruption in politics has been a major issue there. What needs to change for people to regain trust in government? And do you think with these early indications there's going to be any hope of regaining trust in the Panamanian government?
No, I don't think there will be. The population will regain trust in the state or in the next government. It is very, very clear that the next government will attempt to defend the current development model that Panama has pursued since the invasion in 1989. It is based on neoliberal policies and a very unequal and segregated country. And they will do whatever it takes to try and conserve this system because it is the foundation of their power. So it is inevitable that in the first few months of the next government, when they have to tackle some of these issues, especially social security reform, they will face mass resistance from social and popular movements, and these mass protests will probably make the difference towards the next election. So the current political crisis that there is in Panama, with the lack of legitimacy that traditional politicians and their parties have, is an expression of the weakening or of the crisis of the economic system. They have tried to avoid discussing this issue, especially one very important one, that is the Panama Papers scandal. This has not even been a part of the electoral debate because that would touch on the interest of the elite. But they will not be able to hide these issues for long, and they will be forced by popular pressure to have to bring these issues into the agenda.
Absolutely. And really quickly, last question, because you were a pre-candidate for the Broad Front. How does the program of that party differ in the most important ways from the rest of the parties that are dominating today?
The first one is that the only anti-neoliberal policy. It believes that the state has a role to play in the economy, that it has a role to play through public companies, through strategic planning, through the guaranteeing of rights, of social rights, of health, of education, of food, of housing, and that is very different from the programs of other parties who believe in this model of neoliberal growth, of liberalization of the economy, a neoliberal program that has destroyed the country's agricultural sector, industrial sector. So the main difference is it's a platform that's based on guaranteeing the social rights of the population through a stronger role for the government.
Thank you so much, Richard. We've been speaking to Richard Morales, a political scientist who is in Panama, joining us with some very important insight on today's elections. Now our correspondent Rolando Segura is also on the ground in Panama City with this report.
Voting centers have now closed in the general election in Panama. The National Electoral Commission is beginning to share results. There's also a link that lets us follow the vote counting and results. I am keeping an eye on the results for the president and the vice president, but it's still very early. They are not official figures, but we can see 1% of the count. The authorities have said that at around 7:30 p.m. local time, the majority of results are expected to be in, and will likely indicate the next president and vice president of Panama.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again in a minute. Welcome back. Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Ariaza has met with the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, in Moscow to address the political situation in Venezuela. Lavrov called on the U.S. government to stop the irresponsible actions which violate international law. The two ministers are discussing multilateral cooperation and steps to be followed by Venezuela in order to cope with the blockade. Both countries continue to insist on dialogue between the Bolivarian government and the opposition. Ariaza described Russia as a brotherly nation.
President Maduro insists that dialogue is the only way out. In contrast to those who parrot the U.S. stance, they say that all options are on the table, whereas we believe that the only way to maintain peace in Venezuela is through diplomatic means, not through violent means. The Venezuelan people know that we want dialogue. And Russia has been helping us in the international arena to create a group of countries within the UN, and with the help of this group, protect the rights and freedoms of Venezuela and the UN Charter.
And Russia's foreign minister also stressed the need for dialogue and warned the United States against the use of force in Venezuela and Latin America in general.
I hope there are still analysts in Washington. I hope they will consider the consequences of the reckless actions the U.S. may take, because using force against Venezuela or any other nation, like any other Latin American country in the region, would mean humiliation for the entire Latin America. I hope Washington understands that. I'm not sure how much the United States is ready to be guided by international law. This is what's so special about the United States. For decades, it has been projecting power, claiming that they're a force for good. They protect human rights, they advance the interests of the nations they launch wars against. Now, I can give you lots of examples: Iraq, Libya. The U.S. political culture, and this applies to both Republican and Democratic administrations, whenever they face a problem that the U.S. may want to resolve First, they come up with a solution and they force all the parties involved to agree to their solution. But sometimes this unilateral approach doesn't work. And today, we have a number of conflicts like that. So when this approach doesn't work, we have to come up with a collective solution. We disagree on a number of regional conflicts, including Syria, Afghanistan, and the situation on the Korean Peninsula. But in all these three areas, we have professional consultations going on as initiated by the U.S., so this still gives us hope that eventually common sense will prevail. Thank you.
In Venezuela, the day of dialogue called by President Nicolas Maduro has wrapped up, a process in which people gathered to debate changes needed to strengthen the revolution. Our correspondent in Caracas, Leonel Ratamal, has the details.
On
the 1st of May, during his speech for International Workers' Day, President Nicolas Maduro called for a day of changes and rectification, as he called it. This day has been taking place since Saturday, May 4th. Today, on its final phase, begins. And its objective is to make necessary changes that lead to improved conditions that are failing within the Bolivarian revolution. The strong self-criticism that Maduro has done calls on Venezuelan peoples to be part of the discussions that will improve bureaucratic problems or the political direction in the middle of a strong crisis in Venezuela, and also in the middle of the interventionist pressures by the U.S., which are also looking to bring down Maduro's government. Grassroots social movements have gathered. More than 40,000 communal councils and clubs, which are local councils that have to do with the feeding of the population, have been preparing proposals for 3 instances. To the Bolivarian People's Congress that gathers more than 50 social movements. Here, the Socialist Congress of Venezuela is having a session. And also, at the same moment, a Congress of Mayors and Governors is having another session. To be able to receive these proposals, to systematize them, and make them reach the President tomorrow on Monday.
The trial of former Argentine military general Cesar Milani is now underway. Milani was accused of being part of a group that kidnapped and tortured people in 1977 during the dictatorship. A former lieutenant and former judge are also accused in the same case. Milani is also being investigated in 2 other cases related to disappearances. 10 transgender Central American migrants have won asylum in the U.S. state of Texas after being detained for 5 months. They were part of a group of more than 80 LGBTQ+ migrants who traveled with caravans to seek asylum in the United States. The teenagers were kept in holding facilities for 5 months until they could present their cases before an immigration judge. Their lawyers successfully argued that they were fleeing violence in their home countries. Thousands of people continue to travel in migrant caravans towards the U.S. in what Trump has called an invasion.
We have good news. First, my name is Lesat, and I thank God we have been released from detention. We won our Islam case. Thank you, Restos organization, and thank God for releasing us. I feel very proud.
Well, my name is Cataleya. I want to thank God. I feel very, very happy because my dreams have come true. I won my asylum case. Thank you, Raíces organization, for all the support they gave us. Thank you to my attorney, Flor. Thank you, Danny, for always supporting me. Thanks a million. I feel so happy because I know that I'm heading to my new life. My new future starts now.
Following the death of former Peruvian President Alan Garcia, individuals who were part of his administration and close friends are being investigated for allegedly being a part of a criminal network of corruption that was led by the former president.
Peru's public prosecutor's office has revealed the testimony of Miguel Atala, former vice president of the public company Petroperu and Alan Garcia's close friend, who confessed that Odebrecht gave him a bribe of $1.2 million in an offshore account in Andorra, which he then gave to Garcia.
I began to give money to the former president, Alan Garcia Perez. The first time I gave him around $20,000, $30,000. And then progressively, I was giving him money. Every time he needed money, he'd call me and make an appointment at different places.
A court sentenced Miguel Atala to house arrest, while the former secretary to the presidency, Luis Nava,
was sentenced to 3 years in preventative prison. According to the public prosecutor's office, they were part of a criminal network of corruption and money laundering formed by two pillars, government officials and those acting as a front for them.
Both groups had a double role. Firstly, to guarantee the corrupt business without a breach through illegal payments and money transfers to offshore companies. And secondly, to accept all the requirements the company gave them within the Transport Ministry, including the deadlines, conditions, how to do things, and the place they had to be done.
The former Minister of Transport and Communications, Enrique Cornejo, is among those under investigation. He's accused of helping Odebrecht make huge profits by handpicking the company for the Lima Metro.
Around $100 million was stolen during the construction of the first section of the metro in Lima. Also in the Transoceanic Road, money was given as a bribe. According to information we have from testimonies in the Brazilian investigation.
And so even after he took his own life, a cloud of corruption continues to hang over Alan Garcia's presidency.
Israeli attacks on Gaza have killed at least 24 Palestinians, following orders by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to carry out massive strikes on the besieged enclave. The latest violence began on Friday when Israeli forces killed 4 Palestinians in 2 separate incidents, including at the Great March of Return protest. Israeli warplanes have since carried out 150 airstrikes in Gaza, and artillery has shelled 200 civilian locations. 4 Israelis have also been killed as tensions escalate, and fears of a ground invasion rise. Sadiq al-Khaili has been elected as interim speaker of the Libyan parliament. More than 40 representatives have elected the speaker, rapporteur, and a media spokesperson for the body, who will serve for 45 days. 2 journalists have been kidnapped by forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar in Libya. Mohammed al-Kirj and Mohammed al-Shibani are reported to have been kidnapped while covering the ongoing war in Tripoli for the Libyan Al-Ahrar TV channel. In a statement, the channel condemned the kidnapping, saying that it violated international law and the right to press freedom. Algerians living in the French capital of Paris have protested against the country's new leadership. Hundreds of protesters gathered at the Place de la République, calling for the resignation of the Algerian interim president. The demonstration comes a day after the brother and former advisor to the deposed Algerian President Bouteflika was arrested along with 2 former senior intelligence officials. And in India, those affected by the recent cyclone Fani have started to clean up after the deadly storm. Residents of the town of Bhubaneswar said they have begun to clear fallen trees and prepare for the restoration of water and electricity systems. The United Nations commended India for its early warning system and rapid evacuation, which they say helped minimize the loss of life.
But severe means mass destruction happened in Bhubaneswar also. So you can see that a large destruction is here. We are cleaning that so that generators and water tankers can come and we can get that supply of electricity and water.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at tellusenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Our English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.